it is right now time to jump straight into the next session, which is a panel about workflow tricks for growing teams. I'm not gonna name all the people on the panel because I'm gonna leave that to the lovely Oscar Clark of Fundamentally Games, who will be moderating this track. So Oscar, feel free to pop in here. As we're, there he is, all right.
Just joining in. How are you doing? I haven't seen you for so long. Oh my God.
I know. It's usually I see you more often than my family, but now,
exactly.
now we have to substitute with digital.
exactly. Well,
Right.
it's been a fun day or so on doing Pocket Game Digital. I was hosting the Trends track yesterday, and so today it's light work. I just host a couple of panels.
Just a couple of panels, you know.
Just
it's always so involved with these conferences.
I know.
Yeah,
well,
great.
I'm obsessed with it, aren't I? You know, just when you get a panel like we just had, sorry, a talk like we just had about narrative, and then we're going to now talk about workflow, and hopefully we'll get the rest of the panelists joining us in a second or two. I know James is going to be organising all of that, you know, and I'll let those guys introduce themselves. But I mean, the key thing is that this track particularly is all about helping developers understand how they can do their job better. And so having examples of people trying to do things which maybe are slightly out from what most people think of as kind of mainstream gaming, you know, and actually, you know, the heart of the power of games as a narrative exercise, I think is, you know, crucially important. So we're waiting for David at the moment, who should be joining us shortly. But also I think hopefully Zaair and Chris are going to come on board. I'm just waiting for James will hopefully come.
Well, in the meantime, I can just kind of quickly also mention that this Developer Toolkit track is sponsored by Agora.io. So thanks to them for making this morning full of great talks possible. Also, yeah, people can drop questions into the QA into this Zoom interface, and then at the end of the panel, we'll be picking up those questions for the panelists. And also, besides that, there's also a Discord channel where everyone can just like pop in and share their thoughts and ask more follow-up questions, or come in with some help, you know, if they need help for anything. I do see some panelists who are being added to.
Yes, hopefully they'll be joining us now.
All right, so I think this will be the moment where I will shut up. And
here we go. Hey, Chris, how is it? How are you doing? Right, so thank you, Martin. We're going to kick off. I have a feeling that David isn't going to be able to join us, but I'm sure between the three of us we can carry this topic through. So let's start off. Obviously, just to explain to anyone who's listening, this is going to be about talking about workflow tricks. So how do we make it so that we as a business, as a game developer studio, can be as effective as possible, and in particularly how we can bring on freelancers and any outsourced teams to make sure that we can get the best possible success for our development process. So Christopher, could you explain who you are and what you do for Boomzap?
Sure, yeah. I've been in the game industry since, I think I shipped my first game in 1992, 93, something like that. So I've been around for a while. I did AAA development for quite a while, and about 15 years ago, I started with my business partner, Alan, a company called Boomzap Entertainment. And for the last 15 years, we've been a totally virtual studio. So we've had up to, I think the largest we ever got was 97 people working on about 12 projects simultaneously. We had people in, at that time, I think 14 countries. Right now, we're about 35 people, and we're predominantly in Southeast Asia. We've got people in Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and I'm actually here in Yokohama, Japan. And wow. So that's sort of what we do. We mostly have made casual games, but we've also done console games, mobile, PC, Mac, etc. So a pretty broad spectrum. I think in the last 15 years, we've shipped, I stopped counting games at 50. So I'm not sure how many we've made, but more than 50.
More than 50 sounds like a good number, and I totally get you on the remote working bit. I've been working remotely for like the last 9 years, so
I'll never go back.
Yeah, no, exactly. Zaair, so you explain who you are and what you do, please.
All right. Well, I'm a neophyte compared to Christopher, but I've been in the industry for about 7 years now. I'm the business director of an external development team, mostly external development team, called FRAG Games. And like you're saying, worked on all sorts of genres, worked on mobile, a little bit of consoles, some PC. And uniquely, as a business director, I tend to see projects as they start, as they end, and if anyone on either side has any complaints in between. So I spend a lot of time thinking about workflow.
So hopefully no one contacts you in between because everything's working smoothly.
That's what I hope every time, Oscar, every time.
Every time.
Yeah,
Never
that
quite
happens.
works that way.
I promise you there's a world in which that happens. We just don't live in it.
Yes, exactly. I'm sure that's true. So, I mean, let's talk about this issue. So, obviously, the first thing is, quite often, I mean, when I have been a consultant, or when we were bringing a team in to support a game, we're an extension of that team. How do we make sure that we kind of, how do you make sure you set up the right communication, the kind of common sense of direction, a common understanding of what's expected? So Chris, and do you want to start? I mean, what do you think is the kind of key thing that gets the whole process started?
There's a very deep question, and the answer to that is extremely long. I'll try to give a very short version of it. The shortest version I can give of it is, you need to make sure everybody's making the same product. And you have to start from the very beginning, making sure that everybody understands what it is you're making. And this isn't just the people who are in your core team. And this is one of the biggest mistakes I see people do when they bring in outsourcers and freelancers and that sort of thing. They'll cut off one little piece of the project and they'll say, this is what we need you to do. But they won't put it in context, and they won't and I promise you, taking that time up front in the project to explain to somebody, to have the meeting, to talk through the whole project. This is the context of what you're building. This is where what you're building fits in. This is how it's going to work. And this is most important, to explain to them what it's not. And I think this is where a lot of people really mess up, is they'll say, we're going to be an RPG and it's going to be anime style and it's going to be this and that. And when you start putting out those sort of positive, this is what we're going to be comments, they're going to put in their mind an assessment of what that is. And you have no idea what that assessment in their mind is until you walk through, by the way, we're not Bleach and we're not One Piece. And here's why we're not Bleach and why we're not One Piece. You have to be very clear on what you're going to be and what you're not going to be. And you need to get that clear in the beginning. And you need to make sure, and this is, I think, one of the big problems, is you're not just like expressing this. It's not like you can write a document and say, did you read the document? Okay, we're good to go. You need to walk through that. You need to hear their input. You need to hear their ideas up front. You need to make sure that the people that you're working with understand what you're working with. Now, there's a lot of technical details I could get into about how you document that and blah, blah, blah. I can go as deep down that rabbit hole as you want to go. But at the very highest level, that's probably the most important thing.
I tend to agree with that. We've again, I could go down that technical rabbit hole. We've become more and more formal, oddly, about GDDs. But that doesn't mean that I don't agree with you entirely. And actually, the point about the GDD is not actually for me. Sorry, not for the team. It's actually for me to know what I want the game to be generally, well, whether I'm leading it or not. I think your point you're saying is absolutely key, which is a common shared understanding of what it is and what it isn't, is something I think is really hard to achieve. I mean, so with you, when you're working with teams, and it's not your core vision, it's someone else's, how do you sustain that kind of common understanding? And like Christopher says, the bit that the game isn't.
Yeah, I mean, to a large extent, I agree with Christopher. This is a process we developed, or a practice we developed over the years of experience. And I've only just recently, actually, funnily enough, I was exposed to a form of therapy, which I thought was a great analogy, right? I forget, I think it's cognitive analytical therapy or something, where the first several sessions, you're just talking to the therapist like normal, and he or she is building an understanding of who you are as a person, and they kind of like ask you to talk through a lot of things. And at the end of like 4 or 5 sessions, he or she will write you a letter, which is like, this is what I understand about you, right? To me, that's the GDD. And it comes those 4 or 5 sessions later, where you, both teams come together and one of them writes it and the other one is like, and writes it in great detail, right? It's like, is this it? Like, is this close to your vision? The first thing, I absolutely agree with Christopher that there needs to be a lot of communication up front. In fact, a couple of years ago, I just started telling people, look, you're going to get sick of me and my team the first couple of weeks. You're going to hate us. You're going to wish we stopped calling you, that we stopped emailing you, that we, why do we have to get on call 3 times a week, whatever. Like, you're going to get sick of us. That's the process working, because we are just going to bombard you with questions until you can never inhabit someone else's mind, right? But you can get pretty damn close. You can get, the more questions you ask, the closer you get. And the trick is, both sides have this kind of instinctive feeling that they don't want to ask questions, because it's like, oh, they get me, and it's a good feeling, right? Like, if you're just, as you're saying, it's like, hey, anime RPG, it's going to be awesome. And, I'm thinking,
I know what anime RPG is.
Yeah. And they're thinking Attack on Titan, and someone else is thinking Avatar, if that counts. I think it does, but whatever. But you're right. Like, and they're all excited. Like, both sides are excited. Like, yes, anime RPG, that's what we want. And it's kind of, the human mind tends to not ask questions it doesn't want to hear answers to, right? So almost people will hesitate from asking questions or inviting questions, because they're like, oh, like, my headspace is so good right now because I feel these guys totally get me. Let's not ruin that. And that's a very subconscious thing. But the way I've found around it is just be like, look, the first couple of weeks, going to be grueling. Unpleasant amounts of communication are going to happen, right? Like, you're going to answer questions that you thought were obvious. And that's the problem, because different things are obvious to different people. And at the end of that, you come up with the GDD. And
so, Chris,
sorry,
Chris,
go on, Chris.
No, I think, go for it.
All right.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
no, what I was going to say is, I agree with everything you just said, but I think there's something important that needs to be brought up, which is nobody knows what your game is on day one. There's a really famous quote. Jerry Seinfeld is one of my favorite people in the entertainment industry world, right? Jerry Seinfeld once did in his Comedians in Cars with Coffee special. He was talking about the absolute best moment of a project is in the meetings at the beginning, right? Hollywood is not about making movies. It's about meetings, because nothing is ever going to be as good as the meeting when everybody gets together and this is what it's going to be. And I'm just going to be this amazing thing. And then you start building it. And all of the crap that you thought you were going to do, all of these great ideas you had and all this wonderful stuff, once it hits the pavement of, we don't have enough memory to do that, or the coders can't make that, or the tools don't support this, or, and there's all of these things that come in and invade into your dream, right? And as those things invade into your dream, whatever it is you thought you were making when you made that original GDD, you're not making that. I've never seen anything that even looks close to the original GDD get shipped, unless it was like a quick port or a clone or something like that. Nothing creative and amazing gets made in a GDD. It gets made during that process. And a big part of, I think, what we need to resolve when we're talking about how do we work with teams and stuff is not just how do I get them on the same page with me at the beginning of the process when I put the GDD together. It's also, how do I get them to come along this journey with me? Because 3 weeks ago, we had this meeting and we all knew what we were going to build. It was going to be this anime, and it wasn't going to be Bleach, and it wasn't going to be whatever. We had a good idea what we were going to make. But now we're 6 weeks into the process, and a bunch of the stuff that we said we were going to do isn't happening. But there might still be some people on your team that are still 6 weeks ago. They still think they're building that thing that you made 6 weeks ago, but you can't, because you hit into realities that stopped you from making that. And so there has to be a process, not just for this is how we make the GDD, but a process for how do we disseminate this information as we go through building the product? How do we make sure that as we go through this journey of change, how does everyone know not only what we're changing, but why we changed it? And the why is critically important, because otherwise you're going to constantly hit barriers. You're going to hit people saying, but no, it was supposed to be like this. Why isn't it like this? If they don't understand why these changes were made, and if that wasn't communicated, then you're constantly going to have this, it's almost like a shackle holding you back as you're trying to move forward of this past idea that you had that people are still keyed onto. And that, I think, is, if making the original idea is 20%, this is the other 80% of how you have to do this kind of communication. And again, I can go down a very deep rabbit hole of how we do that in documentation and stuff. But the quick answer I would give you to that is, one, you keep your documentation really slim, because the chances of you going and updating a 100-page design doc is slim to nothing. And even if you did, the chances that every 3 or 4 weeks your whole team is going to go reread your 100-page design doc, Not happening. You're lucky if they read it the first time, right?
Yeah.
So you keep your documentation as concise as you can possibly get it. You use a lot of pictures. As you build the game, you take screenshots of where you are in the game right now, and you replace all those concepts with your current, this is how it is right now, and you mark those up with little arrows and stuff and say, well, this is going to change, and this is what we're going to do. You have to keep that current, and to keep that current and to keep people looking at it current, it has to be as minimal as it can get. A lot of our design docs for, you know, relatively big games never get bigger than about 25 PowerPoint slides.
Oh, really? Wow, that is tight. I mean, we work on the principle about a one pager per major feature. So it depends on how big the
something
game
like that. Yeah. Most of our games are casual games, and plus you have to remember there is a lot of sort of shared knowledge in the kind of stuff that we do. We do a lot of hidden object games. My team knows what hidden object game looks like. A lot of that I don't have to document. That's a really
important thing, actually, because I am, because we do so many different types of projects. The biggest problem we have is that I cannot tell you how easy it is for somebody to misinterpret the most obvious thing.
Yes.
Yeah, and you know, I am absolutely 100% clear on what this is, and yet somehow something completely and utterly different gets presented back to me. And I think this goes back to Zaair's kind of comment earlier, getting the person at the other end to write back what they understood before you agree it is really
over communicate. Always over communicate. Like if you think you're over communicating, you're probably still under communicating.
So a lot of this feels to me like the kind of classical kind of business kind of group forming process. The team is the forming, the norming, the storming, the reforming kind of process that they talk about in business school. Do you think that's true, or is there something unique about games and game development that means that the way that we work, we need to think differently about how we manage a team ongoing?
I think we have to be cognizant that we're entertainment. And I don't think that games are unique. I think entertainment is unique. Yeah. If we were building bridges, I could tell you up front, look, this bridge has got to go from here to there. It's got to carry this much weight, and it's got to not fall over when the wind blows on it, right? Pretty straightforward
stuff. Nobody needs a quick time event in a bridge.
Yeah, and there's never going to be a point when you're building the bridge where somebody gets on the bridge and says, like, I don't know, I'm just not feeling this bridge. It's, you know, could it be peppier? You know, like that thing's not going to happen. In entertainment, you're going to constantly run into this, okay, we thought it was going to be cool and we built it and it wasn't as cool as it was supposed to be, and now we have to figure out why and figure out how to fix it. And that loop, and I think if you were making movies or if you were making music or any other kind of entertainment, that's, you know, if you're writing books, this is where you have many, many drafts of books. So I don't think we're not that different from other entertainment industries. I think what makes us a little more different than other entertainment industries is the reasons why something is not fun come up against technical limitations more often than not, right? Yeah. I think if you were a rock and roll band, maybe you're limited by, I don't know, John can't play guitar that fast, but the constant limitations in video games of, we want to do this, but the API that we need to work with doesn't do this, or blah, blah, blah. There's so many technical hurdles that you have to fulfill while still fulfilling the is it fun or not goals. I think that's maybe a little bit harsher for us than a lot of other industries, but I don't know. I mean, if you're working on a Star Wars movie, you're going to hit those limitations with your visual effects and blah, blah, blah. So I think maybe it's not as different as I think it is.
Well, I don't know. I think there is something about, I mean, I entirely agree with you, but I think it's also, we have the added quality nowadays where data has become such a pivotal part of what we do.
Yes.
And particularly those teams which are failing early, doing that kind of lean startup model where, you know, modeling from, say, the way hyper casual games are working and applying that to other games, you know, to be able to make something small fast, test it, and then bring it into the design is, I think, another level of burden above the technical, where we have to really be, you know, pinpoint on the communication of why is this not working? Well, look at this audience. The audience isn't enjoying it or isn't playing the next level. So we have to fix that problem. Do you think that's a kind of a increasingly important factor, Zaair?
Well, I think it's just another way of getting feedback, right? I don't think it's a factor, but it's not a problem. It's just every industry, especially entertainment industries, it goes by whatever feedback it can get, whether it's sales or ticket sales or merchandise or whatever it is. This just gives us more granular data. I think there is a concern that you might be, or some people in the industry might be a little too fast to like jump to whatever the data says and try to like design it by outside committee, essentially. Be like, oh, this feature is getting pulled for like 2 days, so let's focus resources on that. I think you need to understand how to interpret it. I'm not saying we do. I'm saying everyone has to come to their own kind of understanding of how to interpret the data and how quickly to react to it and all of that. But otherwise, I mean, I think it's positive.
That interpretive part is the bit everyone misses. We've become so data driven in games, and everyone wants to talk about, we've got all these data analysts and all this data and all this stuff, but you still sit down and, I've done the same thing everyone else has done. Look at the funnel and look, here it is. And level 4, well, we have a 20% drop off of users. You still have to figure out why. Right? There's still a creative process there to figure out what is happening right here.
Everyone would make only one game per genre, right? The data is available.
Yeah, it's and I think in our world of being data driven, we've forgotten that the data is it doesn't give you the full answer. It just gives you some information. But there's also this other huge part of, okay, you have to like watch people play, and you have to play it yourself, and you have to have your gut feeling of things. There's a lot more to it than just reading the data. I think I'll be honest, I believe as an industry we have become too data driven, and
because
I think
it's available. Right, it's like when you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
I'm not sure I agree with too data driven. I think it's that data only tells you what has happened. It can't tell you what will happen.
Exactly. I'll give you a perfect example. We were working with Big Fish, right?
Yeah.
And we were making a game, and we had a sub game where it was a web, and you clicked on spiders, and it was a fun sub game, and the spiders looked cute, and I liked it. And we got a note back from Big Fish: we have to drop this sub game. We've tested 4 or 5 different games that have spiders in them. Our users hate spiders. We can't have spiders in games. You need to drop the spider sub game because nobody likes spiders. All right, fine. So we went and we redid the sub game. We made it flowers or something. I forget what, right? And the week that we launched, we launched at number 2. And the number 1 game was Wrath of the Spider Queen. And I remember just looking at that like, God damn it, but that's what the data said. The data said they don't like spiders. No, the data said they didn't like spiders in those 4 games that had spiders in them. And I don't think we had done a clear analysis of, is it that they don't like spiders, or they didn't like the way those spiders were used, or maybe they just didn't like those sub games. There was an analysis that was wrong there, because it was totally clear our users were totally cool with spiders if used to be spider queens.
It's a literalization of the data. That's not right. In fact, Marcus Turunen, who's in message in the chat, he just said, if you do things according to the data, you get the results of the data.
That's right.
I'd actually say it's worse than that. You kind of get a derivative of the data, and therefore end up with worse. But I'm a data nut. I absolutely love data, and I like to be informed by data. But like you said, Chris, it's about managing it. So, I mean, what we're kind of trying to do here is like talking about different things that influence the way we start working with a team and how team working operates. But let's bring it back to the whole workflow issue. So what's the most common, once you've established the communication, once you've established the working processes, what's the most common workflow issue that you guys see, particularly when you're working with another team?
People don't know when other people can't work. I would say if I wanted to say, like, where do we lose our most time, right? I got 3 people, they're all working on what they think is important, but none of them know that there's a 4th person that's waiting for this thing that those 3 people need to do. And we work in a remote studio where our communication is a little bit more distant. And so unless you're very on top of it, a lot of people, they log in for the morning and they got their task list and they're ready to go through their task list and they think they've had a great and productive day. And they don't know that somewhere on the other side of an ocean, there's somebody who couldn't work all day because they're waiting for something. And if that communication doesn't happen, you can lose a huge amount of time. I would say that's the number 1 place we lose time.
Yeah, I mean, we found this when I was working at PlayStation Home. We had a whole bunch. So we had teams in San Francisco, we had teams in the UK, and teams in Japan. If I couldn't get the Japanese team to make a decision in the morning, that's 24 hours lost.
Yep.
Because I can't then get everyone else to
We actually make a point. We don't hire a lot of people radically out of our time zone. Most people, if you're north-south, everyone's in a similar time zone and we're all working at a reasonably same time. But the minute we start working with a European publisher, you throw that out the window, because now, okay, you're doing this work and you need this answer from your publisher in Amsterdam, and okay, we get that information about 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon. great, we'll work on that tomorrow, I guess, you know, and that can be quite problematic.
I mean, don't get me wrong, though, it can be helpful at some time. So if
you can work it that way.
Yeah, if the UK's team's been working on a particular piece and they can hand it off to the US team and then hand that off to the Japanese team, then by the time they wake up in the morning, the problem may be even solved.
We get that sometimes in good situations. It's more problematic when people are working on the same sort of, I guess, level of task.
Yeah.
Right. If I've got two animators that are both working on the same video and they're working on different animations for that video, it's way better if they're around and they can ask each other questions in real time and that sort of thing. But if they're working on, one guy's working on the video and one person's working on, I don't know, the front end UI, okay, yeah, they can do that in sort of more different times and plug it all into the same project in the end. So I think this is where, it's not an unsolvable problem. It's something that we've, fought and dealt with for 15 years. There are solutions to it, but I will tell you those solutions mostly come from a really good product manager who is doing that checking every single day and going through people, because you're really going to have a hard time getting random artist X to wake up in the morning and ask the whole team, hey, everybody, I'm going to work on this dragon animation. Is that the right thing to do? Are you sure nobody else needs me to do something? You can say that you want to do that, but she's not going to do that every day, right? You're going to have somebody go poke her and say, hey, what are you working on today? You know what? This other guy's working on this thing and they need this thing from you. That's a thing that someone's got to do.
Exactly. I think people I think in games we mostly understand the role of a producer, but I think we're trying to explain to some clients the role of a producer has been an absolute nightmare. Because like Zaair said,
be on the job description.
Oh, well, but even like you said earlier, the best producer is the one who doesn't do anything for most of the time because they've already got everything lined up. Now, I'm not entirely serious, but if the producer does their job, they're basically going to have a nice, easy ride of it. The reality is that it's never quite like that because obviously things happen. I mean, we're at the moment trying to hire a new producer for our live ops functions. But the key thing is it's really hard to get to people to understand that critical path analysis doesn't just happen. In fact, in some ways, I'd argue one of the weaknesses of the agile approach is that we don't do what we used to do in the waterfall model, which was to work out what the critical path was. So, knowing that somebody, your artist, can't do that work until the concept guy has done their bit.
In fairness, it never worked out in the waterfall model.
Well, yes. Okay.
In fairness, I made my waterfall plans too. They never actually worked.
They never worked.
It felt so good at the beginning, though.
But then again, it looked good, man. Those Excel sheets looked great.
They looked amazing. I like Gantt charts. I love Gantt charts. But
what was that? What was that terrible? There was that Microsoft product that was
Microsoft Project.
That's the one. Oh my God! You remember when everyone was still using that thing and we believed in it?
It looked so good, though.
I feel like a kid that found out there was no Santa Claus. Like the day that I realized that Microsoft Project and all the time I spent on it was completely wasted was like the day I realized there was no God. It was an absolute epiphany to me. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe how much time I've spent making multiple charts.
Because it's not just about the tool, right? Like that entire system of belief came crumbling down. It was like, this was the perfect tool for a thing that doesn't exist. Like for a way of understanding the world that was wrong.
It was like we all sacrificed a goat before we started a project or something. It was, okay, have we done the waterfall chart? Great, now we can actually do the real work and ignore that.
Rituals are important. Rituals are important. We should probably just do waterfall and not follow it. It'll psych the team up.
I still have nightmares of a network infrastructure deployment tool we were forced to use for games. When I was at a telco, you have no idea the pain. For me, project was a delight in comparison. Anyway, moving on from that. So that's
actually, wait a minute. If I could butt in, there was a note over in the Q&A about somebody made a joke about it. So I always ask people to share their screens all day so that I can see what they're working on. It was just a joke, obviously, but I will say one of the ways that we fight this is shockingly similar to this. I do this with all of our artists. If there's any artist in my studio working on anything, I ask that twice a day, they take a screenshot of what they're up to and they post it in Slack, right? And I don't do that because I want to like make sure they're working. I do that because I want to make sure they're not doing something wrong, right? And that ability to see, okay, it's at lunch and, oh, it looks like Marley's been working on this piece of art. Oh, wait, no, that house is totally in the wrong place because of some information that she doesn't have. I don't want her working on that house for the rest of the day with that misinformation. And so as a joke, somebody might say, oh, I want to see over the, that being able to walk over the back of somebody's shoulder and look at what they're up to that producers do in brick and mortar studios. Yeah. My version of that is twice a day, I want you to show me a work in progress of what you're up to, just so I can be like, yep, that's cool. And, or not, right? And most of the time it's, yep, that's cool. But that's actually a really great moment for our artists because they can kind of be like, oh, good, what I'm doing is right. I don't have to worry about redoing this again.
I like that, actually. That's a good, I mean, we do the classic stand-up, daily stand-up thing where you tell people what you're doing and what your blockers are and that kind of thing. As we're growing as a team, that's become increasingly important. But of course, you get to a scale where you can't have everybody in the same room. And so how you make sure that you still keep that communication going between
So what
teams?
we do in replace of those stand-ups, actually, and this is something we developed over 15 years of working virtually, is I have a very specific process. Everybody, first thing in the morning, when they log in the morning and they're ready to start working, they say, this is what I'm doing today. Just a quick little boom, 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 bullet look. This is what I'm up to today, right? And that's not to me. That's in the channel for the project that they're working on. So everybody in the project knows this is what Marley's working on today, right? Twice a day, she sends me a work in progress. This is how things are going. At the end of the day, she puts another little daily report up. The daily report, it's not a big thing. It's just a couple bullet points. Today, I worked on this. And whatever it is you worked on, there has to be a link to whatever it is you did, right? So if you worked on animation, here's a link to the animation in Dropbox or whatever, right? And that is a religious process in our studio. Like if you don't do that 3 days in a row, you're going to get a call from Chris where you're going to be talking about whether or not you want a job here or not, right? That's a very, very strict piece of our studio. Yeah. And at the end of every single day, we do a daily build. And everybody gets the daily build. You wake up in the morning, all of the work that everybody did yesterday is there in the daily build. You can work, even if I unplugged your internet, you can work all day because you've got a copy of the daily build and off you go. That thing is probably, if I have to say one thing about how do I work with people and process them, that thing, that heartbeat of our studio, that's why we've been here 15 years.
Yeah, well, I think that's actually a really interesting thing that you're saying, if I may, Oscar. Yeah. Because I think you just described the difference between processes, which people are obsessed by, and culture, right? Culture is process by example. Culture is, I've heard this a lot of times, and we've actually done it with a few projects, the whole thing of, you post work in progress things, and you have the daily stand-ups, as Oscar is saying, as you have kind of the virtual stand-ups instead. And I think all of those processes are fine. It's like diets, right? Like everyone works, as long as it is religiously, as you say, enforced. It almost doesn't matter what process you have. It's like, what is going to happen if I don't follow it? What's going to happen if I do follow it? And I think that is what makes the difference between great teams and teams which just have read up on great processes. I could Google great processes right now and I'd get the top 5 in the world.
You couldn't be more right. And actually, there's a lot that we do in our studio. If you are a brand new member of our studio, right, the first thing I'm going to do is there's a wiki that we put together that has our whole process in it. Go read that, right? Second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to assign you a mentor. Everyone who comes into our studio gets a buddy. We don't call them mentors, we call them buddies, right? So you get a buddy, and your buddy is not your manager. It's not somebody who has any sort of role over you or anything like that. It's the person that's going to teach you the culture. It's the person that's going to tell you, look, this is how we do stuff here. Right. And it's the person that for a couple weeks, their job is to make sure that you are religiously doing everything that you're supposed to be doing the way it's supposed to be doing. Not as a manager, not as somebody who can come and say, you did bad and you're getting fired. But as a buddy, as a friend, as somebody who's like, dude, if you do it like that, you're going to get in trouble with Chris. Don't do that, right? And
like an older colleague, or a more senior colleague.
In trouble, is it? It's also, this is a better way to do it, and this is how we've been doing it, and that.
This is how we do it. I think that's probably the most important thing, right? Because you can have any process you want. If somebody walks in somewhere, people are pretty smart. Human beings are pretty smart about picking up these cues. If there's something in the process book which clearly nobody is following, they're going to forget about it in a day, right? Yep. And now they're part of that culture. Whereas if everyone is following it, if everyone is always in on time, all the time, if everyone takes lunch at a certain point every time, it doesn't matter where they're coming from, they're going to adapt to that culture almost like 100% of the time. It's process by example, right?
I would also say it's the same as when I was talking about design. Keep it simple, right? Like
Yeah,
you now
exactly.
know all the rules of my studio, right? There aren't any more, right? So like you don't have to, it doesn't take a week to learn what we do. It literally takes somebody explaining it to you for about 5 minutes and then you doing it for a couple days and being like, oh, okay, I get it. And that's it. I don't have to come and be like, well, you didn't fill out your form XB in triplicate and send it to 5.
Yeah, for sure. Like don't over-engineer
keep your crap
process.
simple. Yeah, keep it simple.
I think to me, part of that is about recruitment as well. So we recruit people who we know are self-managing, where they have a stake in the success of the outcome of the company as a whole. And there might be kind of graduate level trying to learn, but our aim then is to get them ready so they can be hired by someone to do the job they want to do. And it might be us, it might be someone else, but we want to grow them. Similarly, we hire someone who's more of a veteran. We want them to be somebody who wants to be taking the whole company forward. And, we don't care about, what hours they keep, as long as they do their hours and as long as they understand when we need somebody there, that they're there. But I don't care if they're up at 6 a.m. and finish, work on the Thursday, or if they spread it out and do work over the week. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is the job is done to a professional standard, and I don't have to chase them because they know what is needed to be delivered.
Absolutely.
It's one of the questions we get most when I tell people that we've been virtual for our whole time is they say, well, how do you know if people are working? And that to me is such a ridiculous question. I know that they're working because the work gets done.
Work gets done, yeah.
Right? I mean, there's no other metric I care about, right? How long did they sit in front of their desk? How long? I don't care. I gave them what I believe to be a reasonable week's worth of work. And at the end of the week, if it's done, then they
and if it wasn't reasonable, you'll find out in 3 weeks when no team can do the work you're assigning.
Exactly.
Actually, going by what you said earlier, going actually by what both of you said, we had this situation about a year and a half ago where we were, and so in Pakistan, right, it's quite uncommon to have this, but we wanted to move to a pure productivity point system, right, where it's just like you just try to measure someone's productivity, and it's different when it's an artist and it's different when it's an engineer, but that's what we were trying to do. And we realized we could not both do that and have things like time-ins and whatever, because it's too complicated. Don't tell someone's like, well, you got to be in before this time, but this is how you get productivity points, and this is how you've got to pick what's important to you. And I think you're right. Like what's important has to be that the work got done, right? Like if the work is not getting done, and this is something I tell my team personally as well, like I don't care how you get results. The day that it's been 2 weeks and you're not getting results, then we're going to have a conversation about your process, right? Until then, like it's none of my business, right? Like I will obviously try to guide you. I'll try and help you with all of those things. And in my case, the team doesn't integrate too much with all the other teams, so it doesn't affect them that much. But that's generally my philosophy of work is like, I totally agree. Keep it simple. Be like, here is what we are targeting. Right? Like this needs to be produced. And if you don't produce it, then we're going to talk about process.
I mean, for me, I'm the guy who wants more all the time. Mm-hmm. Oh, do this. And I'm doing it myself to myself, which is terrible and not good for your mental health, etc. But, the key thing is it comes to a point where you kind of make sure that the other person knows they need to push back.
Yes.
Actually, I think in the dynamic where you empower people to take responsibility, and that they push back in an understanding that that's going to be listened to.
Yep.
I think
that's part of culture.
We do, we don't do stand-ups, but at the beginning of the week, I assign work, right? As a project manager, I say, okay, we've talked about what we're building. This is what I think you need to do today, Zaair, and this is what you need to do today, Ejul. And I assign out that work. And that's the moment at which they can be like, Chris, how soon do you think that's going to be done? And I think that's going to take about a week. I don't know, man. That's a lot of work for a week. I could probably do this and this and that. We have that discussion early in the week. One thing I think a lot of studios get wrong is just what you said. They got project managers that always want more. They always want more. And what happens is it creates a really perverse incentive. You take two people, right? One person is really good at their job. They're going to get everything done really quickly. Another person sucks at their job. They're screwing around. They're playing Warcraft all day, right? The guy who's screwing around playing Warcraft all day doesn't finish his stuff. Now you, as a project manager, you still need that stuff done, right? And you're probably not going to fire him because he still gets some work done sometimes, right? So what you do is you take the work he didn't do and you hand it to the person who did a bunch of work because she's got some free time because she got all her stuff done, right? And so what ends up happening is the reward for one person being a real go-getter and getting a bunch of stuff done is they're going to be constantly loaded down with work, and they're going to feel like, wow, I never get a break. And the punishment for get your stuff done really slow is we're going to give you less stuff to do so you have more time to play Warcraft, right? And it's a really perverse incentive. And one of the really nice things about running a virtual studio for me has been, I don't really know what anybody's doing at home. They could be playing World of Warcraft half of the week. And you know what? If they are, I'm happy, because that means that they're rewarding themselves with what they want to do with the spare time that they bought by finishing their job early. Yay, everybody wins, right? That way of thinking about stuff, it's really hard to get people into that mindset, that idea of it really doesn't matter how long they work. I know what a week's worth of work for a skilled animator is. I know what that is. I'll assign that out every week. If I'm wrong, the animator will let me know, right? And as long as that gets done, if they spent Thursday and Friday playing World of Warcraft or hanging out with their cousin, I don't care. Have at it. Do it.
Why should you, right? Like, why should you care? Like, there's this problem that studio heads especially, and I guess bosses all over the world get into this like dangerous mode of thinking where it's like, this person owes me this time. Nobody owes you time. They owe you work. Yeah. Right. And the more you can kind of get out of the way of that, and the more you can empower and enable that, the better it is for everyone. And
the thing that happens when you become a more skilled worker, whether a skilled animator or a skilled artist or a skilled programmer, is, I mean, maybe your code is a little bit cleaner, but what you really do is you get your code done faster, right? That's the number one thing that happens as you get better as a coder or as you get better as an artist, is you're going to just get stuff done faster. And so,
and you make fewer
the reward for that should be that you get more time. Now, something I will say that we have moved to lately in the studio, and this is recent, this is only in the last couple of years, is we've actually shifted a number of our artists who were doing the same work over and over again. Again, we make hidden object games. And so I had a bunch of artists that were making hidden object scenes. And I knew for the next 6 months, you're making hidden object scenes, right? Pretty straightforward piece of work. And so instead of saying, I'm going to pay you by the month, I just said, look, I know how big a scene is. I'm gonna pay you by the scene. I know how much, I know how long that's gonna take. I know what that should cost. Now they're still full-time working with me, but I'm paying them by scene, right? And now the reward is even greater. You know what? If you finish early in the week and you want more money, by all means, start another scene. And our more successful artists earn more money, and our less successful artists earn less money. And the guy that plays World of Warcraft, that guy earns a lot less money. And I don't have to worry about getting on people's backs and saying, hey, work faster, work faster. You want the money, you work faster anyway. I've actually been, we're in the middle of this experiment where we're sort of outsourcing to our own team, I guess I should say. And it's been a very successful experiment.
With bonuses, right?
Sorry, go for it.
Yeah, it's basically a built-in bonus system, yeah.
So we're running out of time, so I'm going to obviously invite anyone who wants to ask questions to do so. I mean, personally, the one thing we found really useful, we've started using tools like Notion and Miro, but particularly Notion is taken over from Trello for us, because it means we've got everything in one place. I can track what's going. I can allocate people tasks whenever I need to, and they can manage their own time, and I can see what's going on. Is there one kind of piece of advice or one set of tools that you would recommend to anyone who's going to work with both internal and external people?
The big thing that we do, I've used both Notion and Trello, and I find them largely interchangeable depending on how your team works. Either one can work. Yep. We use Trello, but I would actually not talk about a project management tool. The tool I would suggest is stop doing your Word documents, right? Any Word document or Google Docs, I guess it's called, just stop that. Right? Move to a much more visual way of showing your design and talking to your team. Almost all of our work when we're doing creative work and explaining stuff to each other is done in Google Slides. And it has a lot of value. One of the things is it's right there. It's a pretty little image, and it forces you to be concise because you've only got that one slide and you got to put your information in that slide. And unless you're making it really tiny and hard to read, you're going to have to be concise. It forces you to be concise. But the other thing is we can actually work on that collaboratively. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll get into, we never do, I don't know what any of my team looks like. We never look at each other's faces. We always share the screen when we work, right? And so what we'll do is we'll get in the Slack chat. We'll share the screen in the Slack chat, and the screen will be the Google Slides, and we'll actually walk through what we're going to do. And people are drawing on the screen, people are moving things, adding stuff, adding notes. We actually build a lot of our design together collaboratively as part of a working meeting. It becomes our whiteboard. And I would say more than any other tool in our studio, that gets a lot of use.
Try Miro. Miro is awesome. It's basically literally a collaborative whiteboard.
I played with it. It had too many features, actually.
Oh, I love it.
I got blown away by so many features. And the thing I like about Google Slides is at the end, it's got the, export as PowerPoint, and I can send that to my publisher. It's a really nice way to, you end up with a document, like a real live honest to God slide document, which is nice.
Fair enough. Zaair?
For me, it's not so much the tools, because as an external development team, we've used a bunch of different tools, Asana, Jira, Pivotal, all of that, depending kind of on the client. For me, it's much more important that, so I read this once by Chet Holmes, and I kind of paraphrasing here. The attitude towards scaling your team up, right? Whether that's us or we're working with other teams or whatever our processes are, whatever our culture is. It's a really interesting mental exercise to be like, okay, if I had to add 10 people from a different team every week to this project, would the workflow collapse, right? Would the processes collapse? And that little, it's just a mental trick, but it's helped a lot in being like, okay, like you're saying, keep it concise, keep it really simple. Misunderstandings should be very minimal. Everyone who is currently on the project, whatever tool they're using, needs to have the same culture. Is it a culture of asking a lot of questions? Is it a culture of every day at 2 p.m. is there a work in progress report? And I found that once you've gotten that, then you can kind of, at least theoretically, just keep adding people every week if you had to, and it wouldn't collapse. And there's a lot of Google Docs being one of them, by the way. We're if we had to add 10 people to Google Docs every week, what would happen? It was well, nothing would get done ever. Right? It forces us to be more concise and to be a little more precise, I guess, in these communications. Can you have 40 people on a call? Well, if 38 of them are muted, yeah. Right? It was that, those things actually ended up helping us a lot, because it's things in that call example, everyone can be a part of it. And you have usually two single points of contact talking, but the whole team, or in some cases, both teams, are listening in and understanding why the decisions are being made, right? Especially if something has to be changed.
That was great. Thank you very much. I mean, there's so many areas we wanted to cover. There are a couple of questions that just popped up. We have literally 3 minutes to answer them. I'm going to pick the first one. If you had 4 art directors and 20 projects, would you assign 1 art director per project, or do you see advantage in assigning 2 or more to a single project? This is for an art outsourcing studio. Anyone want to pick up on that?
I would say, unless there's a compelling reason not to, you would want 1 art director per project. Having a single point of communication with the publisher or the client, and a single vision holder. The only compelling reason I would see not to do that is if you've got somebody who's a really good manager, but they don't have the right art style, then you might say, hey, this is the person who's going to manage the project and talk to the client, but actually internally, this is the person who's going to manage the art style and talk internally to the people to make sure that we keep the same art style. That's the only compelling reason I can see to put 2 art directors on something.
Yeah, I think
in that scenario, I would say only 1.
Yeah. So another question, again, we've got so little time, but do the artists move the Trello cards, or only the project manager?
Only the project manager. Next question.
Yep.
I actually have a slight difference. We have an extra column for the artist or the coder to move to ready for review. That's the only way we let them change anything.
We did that for a while, but I actually like the action of one of the people on my project telling the project manager, hey, I'm done with this thing. That thing, to make them move the card, inspires a conversation that I like. So I don't really want them moving the card.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. And I think I'm going to sneak this last one in. How important are the language non-coding skills of your team to your virtual team? You know, how important is verbal language for your virtual team?
Game designers and project managers extremely important.
Yeah.
And for everyone else, less so, but it should still, there should be some level of understanding. Because usually the documents and management is done across one language.
Yeah.
We work in a lot of different language regions. The studio is English only. I think a better answer to that question is, I agree that project managers and what's not are really critical to be in the key language, whatever language your studio works in. But I think that person also has to be very cognizant that everyone in the studio is maybe not a first language speaker in that language, and to risk of saying it, dumb down the language a little bit. Use simpler words, use simpler phrases. Make sure that the people in your studio who aren't speaking in a first language definitely got it and didn't just kind of nod at you and say they got it because they're embarrassed that they didn't understand. That is an important part of that project anyway. Yeah.
Even if it is everyone's first language, simpler phrases usually a good idea.
Yeah.
And on that note, Martin's looking at me
like, what's up?
People out.
We must go now.
Let's go now. Chris,
thank you so much.
Fantastic talking to you again.
Because I know Martin. You guys will be able to continue talking for 3 days at least.
Really?
Because I will be.
Thank you much for all your input on this great panel. I believe I'll be seeing Oscar a little bit later for another panel.
Guys, I got to run to my next panel. Thank you so much.
I'm going to go have dinner. Bye-bye.
See you later.